Hey, all right.
We did it.
Yeah, I was watching Pixar's Soul the other night and thought of you as I was watching some of those piano solos go down.
You're one movie ahead of us. We're making our way through the Queen's Gambit, and then Soul is next on the agenda.
I think you're going to enjoy it. It's a little different. I don't know that it was actually meant for kids.
Really? Huh? Well, supposedly they get into the details of what improvisation is all about.
Yeah,
which I'm trying to see how they did that.
Which is the heart of intersections.
The heart and soul of intersections.
It's a weekly conversational jam session, using that as a segue, that dives deep into the intersections among technology, innovation, culture, and ideas. Welcome to the show. This is our year-end 2020 show. As I was joking on Twitter yesterday, in just a few short days, January 1st, 2021, hindsight will officially be 2020. So thank you for joining us today. Please do feel free to share where you're tuning in from. Share your observations and your questions and comments. I'll do my best to make sure that they're shown on screen. We love to hear where you're joining from, of course. Also, please remember, if you have any recommendations for guests or ideas for the show, please do share. We're going to brainstorm here soon about 2021 ideas and opportunities for the show. We're going to shake things up and make things super exciting. Before we kick things off today with our first guest, I want to introduce the amazing, really just becoming a dear friend of mine, John Kao. John, before I introduce you, I just want to say thank you for being my partner in this show this year, and looking forward to doing more awesome stuff with you next year. I've learned a lot from you, and it's just been an absolute pleasure to work with you on this show. With that said, I'll officially introduce you. John John has been called by The Economist. He's been referred to as Mr. Creativity, a serial innovator. He's a thought leader, entrepreneur, and advisor. He's played a prominent role in the fields of innovation and business creativity for over 30 years. He's taught at Harvard Business School. He served as visiting faculty at MIT Media Lab in Stanford. He's also a Tony-nominated producer of film and stage, and he wrote the best-selling book, Jamming: The Art and Discipline of Business Creativity. You've also heard some of his playing here in our intro, and you'll hear it again in our outro, an improv that he just kind of came up with and whipped together for our lovely intro and outro that I actually adore, and hope that John ends up making the soundtrack for the show. John, welcome to Intersections.
Thank you, Brian. Well, you know, what would a live stream show be without music? So I think 2021 is going to be a amped up musical year for us. First of all, let me respond in kind. I could not imagine a better partner for this intellectual jam session. And, you know, we both are card-carrying innovation guys, but our style, our approach, our knowledge base, our networks are so highly complementary that it's the old story of 1 + 1 = 10 or 100. And friend, absolutely. You know, as you get on in years, what's most important is the people who mean something to you and who you hope you wind up meaning something for them. So you are one of those people for me, and we have a lot of fun things to explore in 2021. And that is also because Brian is an enormously polymath level, talented, accomplished thought leader in the digital domain, set many of the digital innovation standards for customer experience, for user and design thinking related applications, for thinking about how enterprises needed to function in this, rapidly accelerating cycle of innovation that we are in, like it or not. And it has expressed this in keynote speeches and books and advocacy and widgets of all kinds that we can, I think, make use of very happily, and even has a formal role as the global innovation evangelist for Salesforce. So there is a day job and a night job and probably an evening and a morning and everything in between job for Brian. So, hey.
Hey, thanks for that, John. John, I also love your background. Very festive. I guess I could have done something.
I got to get the Zoom left-right thing going. But yeah, it's the very best imagery that Shutterstock can provide.
Yeah, there we go. Giving you the full view there. All right. Well, let's jump in with our first guest. He's actually a friend of mine I've known for several years. He's got an incredible background. I've known him as the co-founder of Neversoft. He helped create the Tony Hawk franchise of video games, and quite addicted to playing some of his work, I must say. He's since moved on, became one of the foremost experts on debunking conspiracy theories. And it was really interesting to watch someone that from this illustrious background in video game design to becoming just I see his work referred to quite a bit online and on TV, and he is the author of a recent book called "Escaping the Rabbit Hole: How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic, and Respect." I got to tell you, though, I feel sort of a kinship not only with Mick because we're friends, but because he wrote a book like I wrote Life Scale. Before all of this stuff just sort of hit this fervor pitch, and think that this is a book that could be re-released all over again and probably find an even more prominent audience now. Like, I wish Lifescale was released now that we're forced to become digital first, and also post Netflix's The Social Dilemma. So with that intro, let me bring on Mick. Mick, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm going to be multitasking, Mick. So as we're talking, you might see my eyes move all over the place. This is me trying to figure out how to do Gregarious's role as producer. For example, if I hit this, that puts John there. Look at this. Okay, look at that. I'm on a roll. So, Mick, welcome to the show. Maybe kind of jump into the fact that you made this really interesting switch. What inspired you to write the book and also to become a champion of truth? Thank you for doing this, by the way.
Well, thank you. It's kind of a long story in time-wise, but it's not that complicated of a story, really. As you know, I was a video game programmer, and I did the Tony Hawk video game, and then retired like a long time ago, back in the mid-2000s. And I just wanted to do stuff that I personally found interesting. So I did a bunch of stuff in tech. I did a bunch of consulting and things like that. And then I was just following my own interests. And one of those was learning to fly. I decided taking flying lessons, and I was learning about flying. And I discovered this conspiracy theory called chemtrails. And I had always been really interested in just talking to people on the internet. It's something I got sucked into. I guess it's part of my personality type. And I started thinking, I can just start debunking this stuff. And so I started writing a blog on chemtrails and debunking chemtrails. And that kind of grew into quite a large thing. I ended up being interviewed on TV, on CNN and CBS and places like that, on various chemtrail stories, contrail stories. And then I started debunking other things like 9/11 and false flag theories, and even flat Earth and UFOs and stuff like that in my next website, which is called Metabunk. And originally, I was much more focused on the minutiae of things, like the technical aspects of it, because my background is in technology and 3D graphics and things like that. But eventually, I got more and more interested in the people and talking to the people and trying to figure out how the brains work, and how you can actually talk to someone in a way that will help them get out of their conspiracy theories. Because just simply showing them the facts didn't seem to be working. So I got to try to figure out what you can do to help them out. And that kind of grew into more posts on Metabunk on that subject. And then eventually to my book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, and my podcast now, Tales from the Rabbit Hole, where I talk to people who were down the rabbit hole, but now are not, and try to figure out how that actually works.
Oh, wow. I have to add your podcast to my list. I got to tell you, it's going to sound strange, Mick, but I kind of long for the world where the only conspiracy theories we had to debunk were chemtrails. I just shortly before this show, I was God, I could go down so many rabbit holes. So I got to imagine you're busier than you were before. And let's start with the basic question. And John, let's make this one more interactive instead of just kind of me hogging the show for a bit and then throwing it over to you.
Okay.
Mick, I'll just kick things off, and then John, feel free to jump in however you'd like. Mick, how does someone come out of the rabbit hole? Can we just start with that? Because, you know, the subtitle of your book's using facts, logic, and respect. You think that those are the three key pillars of just bringing someone to truth. But we've kind of come into this post-truth world, and I just would love to hear, you know, what you're hearing at a high level. Maybe we start with good news, and then we can kind of go into the deeper things there. How are you hearing or learning that people can kind of wake up?
Well, the good news is that people actually do get out of the rabbit hole because we have examples of them doing that. And a lot of the time when people think about it, they just think about their friends and relatives who are currently down the rabbit hole. And when people are deep within a conspiracy theory, when they're deep into something, especially in the early stages of it, it seems impossible that they will ever get out. You know, you throw facts at them and they just bounce off. They might even get angry at you, and they start calling you an idiot and calling you a sheep. But we know from history that people do get out over a long period of time. Sometimes it's very quick, sometimes it's very, very long. So just because someone has been a hardcore conspiracy theorist for years even, and even if they seem to be getting worse, it doesn't mean that they won't get out eventually. For many people, it's kind of a journey or a trajectory that they go through, and they kind of have to get to a certain point before they can come down again. And historically, with things like chemtrails and 9/11, people they go through the whole conspiracy theory because the conspiracy theory itself is fairly static. So they're kind of incrementally learning all these things about it, and then sometimes something will get debunked and they'll move on to something else. But eventually, they've kind of covered all of it, and at that point, they kind of start re-examining things in a different way, and they start eventually giving themselves permission to examine things, and then at some point there's a tipping point and it all unravels. But everything before that tipping point, it seems like they're completely solid and you're not going to get anywhere. But when they get to the tipping point, things start to open up, things start to improve, and eventually they will get out of it. So the key is trying to get them towards that tipping point. You're not going to be pushing them down the slope. If anything, you're going to push them up the slope so they get to a point where they can come down again. So there is hope, but don't be disheartened by the fact that it seems hopeless, because everybody who's gone through this journey was in a position in the past where it seemed like there was no hope, but then they're out of it.
You know, what you're saying reminds me of Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, where he talks about paradigm shifts, right? So you have, you know, the one theory of how the universe works, and if you disagree with that, you're burned at the stake, and it's my facts versus your facts. And then there's this notion of almost a scale where disconfirming evidence begins to pile up on one side, but the dominant paradigm or delusion or conviction or belief in our case, a conspiracy theory, still holds sway. And then there is enough disconfirming evidence so that there's a paradigm shift. And now what is, you know, heresy becomes orthodoxy. But the question that I want to ask, platforming off of that, relates to the word that Brian used, which is post-truth. You know, the old saying in Congress was, you know, you may be entitled to your opinions, but not to your facts. But I think one of the problems right now seems to be that people are able to either marshal facts or conjure facts or invent facts that are counterfactual to, quote unquote, the real facts. And so you have this kind of argument in a way between my facts versus your facts, and whose facts are better. And when you have media empires backing the counterfactual arguments, and pseudoscience and battalions of lawyers, it's a very different situation from, you know, some cult leader saying the comet's passing by and we need to climb on.
Yeah, I don't think the variance in facts and perceptions of facts is necessarily a new thing. I think what's happening more is that there's been this disintegration of traditional media. Previously, we still had this polarization in the media. We had extreme polarizations in the newspapers, and we had extreme disinformation in newspapers, going back hundreds of years even. This isn't something that's really new, but I think what we're seeing now is more of a fracturing of that dissemination of information. Like, people did, to a certain degree, get their information from the TV evening news, and that started to go downhill.
Walter Cronkite,
cable
right?
news. Yes, indeed. Yes, the real most trusted name in news back then would have been these evening news anchors who had years of experience and were generally liked and trusted by the populace, and a large percentage of the population listened to them, and it kind of created a kind of consensus reality where the facts were, I think, in general, more accurate. But even then, obviously, there's the spin that those people put on those facts. Just because it came from Walter Cronkite doesn't mean it's necessarily 100% objective reality. There's still his perspective he's putting on it. But things have changed now. Now we've got a vast number of different information sources. Obviously, we have the division of the news into the cable news, things like Fox News, but even that now is disintegrating further, and we're getting increased polarization because there is now a marketplace for extreme news, whereas there wasn't the technological possibility of having this kind of advanced news outlets like One American News, or even things like the Epoch Times, for example, and their New Tang Dynasty TV. These are things that couldn't have existed before because they really wouldn't be a financial way for them to get out there. But now there is, and we're getting this very strange new world, and we've got to learn how to navigate it. Now, Brian talked about my book could have been republished now, and it would still have worked. But I think it's kind of out of date in some respects because I wrote it about 3 years ago, and a lot has changed in the last 3 years, and I think I would have to add several new chapters if I was to bring it out again now.
Well, you could do the revised, expanded version, right? And
good, yes.
Write once, sell twice. That would be a good model.
Yeah, so I'll check with my publisher and see what.
So, Brian, go ahead. You were going to say something.
I was just going to jump in on that one point, because added to that, Mick, where you have outlets like Newsmax and One American News Network, you have essentially the internet now becoming Facebook, saying that any link shared on Facebook must be true, I guess, and then you have resources in private groups like those that support QAnon. It's very difficult, I think, for anybody who, even the media literate, to understand when something isn't true, and then following sort of that domino theory then of getting down that rabbit hole. How is it that society? I mean, I understand the First Amendment, so I don't want to open that can of worms. But how is it that society, capitalism, advertisers, sponsors, how is it that we haven't seen the down or the dark side of all of this from a business standpoint, right? The fact that all of these networks are supported by advertisers, that the propagation of information is shared equally, regardless of source, and that we're watching an incredible, especially in the United States, but it's all over the world, an incredible division, not only between fact and fiction, truth and lies, but also the intentional disinformation and propaganda of dividing people. How is it that we haven't, as a society, responded much more swiftly and deeply to this?
I think we are starting to do that. When I wrote my book, I was talking about some of the things that big media was trying to do, things that YouTube was trying to upplay certain videos and downplay certain other videos, and Facebook was trying to do a little bit of fact checking. But it's a very, very difficult thing to do because it's kind of like an arms race. If you try to put one thing in place to prevent it, then they'll come up with something else. They'll start phrasing things in a different way, or they'll move to a different platform. But there is a lot being done. And they're actually, I think there's a sense of urgency in a way that these things need to be done. The reason big media is doing this, people like YouTube, is mostly from self-interest. It isn't so much that they're trying to save the world and be good. They want to keep their advertisers, and they want to avoid regulation. So they want to keep things off their platform that are going to cause harm. They wouldn't want people putting up videos that encourage terrorist attacks, for example, and things like that. And they want to keep their advertisers, and their advertisers don't like these extreme videos. Now, in the past, the algorithms that YouTube used were much more blind to the nature of the content, and they just simply focused on increasing the viewer retaining metrics that they have there. But that's changed quite a lot. And if you go on YouTube now, compare it, if you could do such a thing, compare the search results and what comes up now with what came up 3 years ago, it's radically different. So there's been a huge shift on YouTube in terms of how it will allow things to surface. It doesn't allow 9/11 videos and chemtrail videos and flat earth videos and QAnon videos to surface in the way it did before. And if you go in and you search now for chemtrails, you'll get a bunch of mainstream media articles basically explaining that that chemtrails are just contrails. But this is kind of a double-edged sword, though. When we push down at these things, they're popping up somewhere else, and you know, obviously you're aware of the other social media platforms that are increasing, like Parler, and then there's other video outlets like BitChute. And something I'm increasingly seeing is the paywalling of conspiracies, where small niches within the conspiracy sphere are setting up sites where you have to pay to actually watch their content. And people are doing that. And I think that works not only as a revenue stream for the conspiracists, but it works as a viewer incentivization thing. So if someone's paying for some content, it makes them want it to be true much more than if they simply find it for free on YouTube. So things are shifting rapidly. People are trying things and they're doing big things, but it's in the middle. We're in the middle of an arms race.
Well, it's interesting you use that word, because I just written the word war and memes on my little scribble sheet here. You know, it seems that one of the conclusions, inescapable conclusions, is that we're lacking a stable platform of truth to stand on, comparable to Walter Cronkite in the 50s, and that any opinion voiced can have the counter opinion validated in the absence of, you know, I mean, I read the New York Times, but a lot of people think the New York Times is the opposite of the truth, et cetera. So everything is, how do we find absolutes in a relative environment? And that relates to the question of urgency, because, I mean, you're a conspiracy theory expert. You know, you could argue that a lot of the division in our country and the conflicting memes and the weaponization of social media is actually a concerted effort by our adversaries to weaken our country. And that if you have a country where belief has been fractured into a million pieces and we're now fighting with each other on many, many levels, we are inherently a weaker country, despite our wealth and our, you know, assets and so forth and so on. That makes us less effective on the global stage. So I wonder what you think of that, you know, and then also where we can go to really stand on a platform that has, you know, facts, logic, respect, truth, authoritativeness, etc.
Yeah, well, I think you're right that there is definitely a problem, and we are essentially we're under attack from foreign nations. You know, really, there's China and Russia, and they're both trying to do things, and Iran and North Korea, and they do not have our best interests at heart, and they're basically performing, you know, what the Russians refer to as active measures, which is something they've done for many, many years, where they try to sow confusion and sow dissent within a country and reduce the country's standing in the eyes of the world. And this is something that's been going on for a long time and is really amplified now. And I don't think we're going to get a bastion of objective truth, because anything that gets put up now becomes a target for attacks. You know, we get things that are generally very neutral, things like the fact-checking organizations that are out there, factcheck.org. And because they have some association with one media outlet or another, then it makes it very easy for other people to point a finger at them and say that's, you know, controlled opposition from the left, or George Soros or whoever. So I think we need to continue with these efforts of fact-checking and debunking, certainly, but we also need to look at the bigger picture, and we need to look at the broader context, and we need to look at how do we communicate the broader context to other people? How do we communicate the broader context to the conspiracy theorists? And this is something I refer to as floodlight debunking. I divide debunking into two types: the spotlight, where you shine a light on individual things and fact check them, and then there's floodlight, where you try to explain to people what the broader context is and what actually is going on. How do things actually work? And you can try to explain to people, what is the Russian active measures campaign? How long has it been going on? What are the things they've done in the past? What are the techniques that people use for disinformation? What propaganda techniques are being used? How does advertising work? How do politicians do this type of thing, present information? I think if you just focus on the details, then it's going to be this endless whack-a-mole game. We've got to look at what's behind the curtain, and we've got to try to show what's behind the curtain to people out there. And don't just say, like, trust this source. I'd say trust this source. Say, here's this source, and this is where it gets its funding. And here are the people involved. Here are the individual people with lives and families who are real people. And here's some other organization with some other real people, and they have these real motivations out there to get the truth out there. And here's another organization that perhaps has a different strategy and has a different motivation that's at odds with this, and explain why that is so, and try to get people to understand the broader context. It's a very difficult thing, obviously, but I think if you don't do that, then you're just going to be left forever at whacking down the moles of disinformation.
Can I ask a real quick question? Because there are conspiracy theories, and then there's radicalization. And I think what we've watched, I did a lot of this research, going back before the 2016 election, trying to understand, how social media radicalized, for example, ISIS recruiting, and how it would convert what would be seemingly normal, logical people into terrorists. We've seen it happen on our own soil now, where the attacks are happening from within. We have, for example, even though, like you said, thankfully YouTube has been making improvements. We have like Newsmax, for example. You have a media organization that is willfully sharing mis or disinformation because there's profit in it. You have the CEO of Newsmax going on the record saying that they're not changing anything because it's actually much more viral. It's much more engaging. As you said, people are willing to pay for it. We saw in Social Dilemma that conspiracy theories are 6 times more viral than the truth. And then that sort of opens up one more door. So you have radicalization that I want to talk about. And then you also have addiction, where these elements become so ingrained in who we are and in our belief system that there is no other truth other than the truth that you believe. And so I'd love to hear from you, Mick. Now that the war is in our own country, and it's happening in daylight, you have a president who is purporting all of these things as truth. You have 70+ million people who actually believe that the election was stolen or fraudulent. What can we do tomorrow? One, for ourselves to stay stronger, but two, to make information, to make engagement, to make news matter again. Now, what are some of the steps that we could take to rectify this?
Well, I think one approach that has been used to counter radicalization in the past that has been shown to work fairly well is what's called the redirect method. And this was something that was pioneered by a division of Alphabet, Google, called Jigsaw. And they partnered with YouTube to basically try to detect when someone was looking for jihadist videos. And then when they would still show them these videos. They would also show them another video, like up next, which was a video of someone who was a former jihadist explaining what life was actually like, you know, giving this context that I was talking about earlier. And it was kind of an automatic way of kind of bringing someone in and then showing them something else. And I think this redirecting is something that's very, very important, because you can't just take away somebody's game and expect them to go on with their life. You know, people have incorporated these conspiracy theories into their very existence, and you can't just remove it. You need to kind of substitute it with something else. This is a strategy that is used in debunking climate change denialism. You can't just prove that something is false, and you can't just say, like, you know, it's not true that there's no correlation between the carbon dioxide and whatever. You need to actually provide facts to fill the void that you've just debunked. So I think what we've got to do is look at, why are people getting so invested in these things? And some people have suggested that it's very much like a game. People are playing a game, kind of an alternate reality game, and they're getting the same things out of it as they would from playing some kind of online game. So is there a way that we can then kind of replace one game with another game? I mean, it sounds kind of silly, because it's what we're talking about kind of seems like, you know, kind of brainwashing almost. But it's not. Like, people, media has changed. The way people consume the media has changed. The way people interact online has changed. Everything's changing, and no one really knows exactly what's going on here. And things have changed to such a degree that we've arrived at a very, very serious situation. And there are no experts here. There are no experts who know what's actually happening at the broad level. You know, what is the trajectory we're going through? Where will things end up in? So I think we have to kind of look outside the box to a degree, and think, you know, if people who are doing QAnon think that they don't think, if they're essentially playing a game, then could we provide them with something else that resembles that? Something we could suggest maybe is that, like, maybe you should also look into Russia. You should look into what Russia is doing. Maybe you should also look into what Iran is doing. And there are other interesting avenues that you can explore. There are other interesting things that are similar to this. You can look into corruption within the US in Congress. You know, things like that exist. Look into big business. Look into real conspiracies that have happened in the past and that may well be happening now. And don't just restrict yourself to this one thing. So I think redirecting people from the rabbit holes that they've got stuck into, perhaps into other rabbit holes, but perhaps things that are more productive, and certainly things that will give them a better perspective of the world and a more balanced perspective.
I'm going to try a hypothesis on you that's based on what I know about anthropology. There's a history of so-called revitalization movements where societies that are under incredible stress and are disintegrating develop magical thinking of one kind or another. It was true in Melanesia, where after World War II, the local population would construct effigies of DC-3s and parade around in mock military uniforms, because they were convinced if they did that, that the military planes would come back with spam and cargo, as they called it, cargo, and that became the notion of the cargo cult. And you know, in the 19th century, the Native American population, you know, there was a ghost dance where there was a dream that one person had that you know, certain kinds of garments would be bulletproof, and that you could go out and restore the buffalo. And I'm just wondering whether in your scan of all of this material and all of these traditions, whether the level of societal cohesion to begin with, socioeconomic health, cultural health, may have something to do with a vulnerability to conspiracy theories. Because it strikes me that, you know, if you take a more psychological point of view of what are these conspiracy theories trying to accomplish, they're trying to create explanations in the minds of people who may not feel like they have an organizing principle for understanding what's going on in the world. So this becomes, you know, to use graphic novel speak, kind of the secret history of the world of affairs. What you really need to know that you didn't know, which is the the Illuminati or the underlying truth, quote, truth of things. And I'm wondering whether that in some respects has a correlation to the degree of social cohesion, whether in Norway, for instance, you have the same prevalence of conspiracy thinking people that you do, or conspiracy thinking that you do in rural America, for instance.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about the cargo cult thing and related things. Like, something I was thinking about before I came on the show was Albania. And after the fall of communism in Albania, there was kind of a radical shift in society where they kind of took up capitalism. But because they had no experience of doing it, and it was such a radical shift, they kind of messed it up. And there was the rise of these pyramid schemes in Albania, where you would give money to someone, and then later you would get lots of money because people downstream would be giving you money. I mean, you know how a pyramid scheme works. And this became this huge thing in Albania that actually caused the collapse of the government, and in some ways the disintegration of society in Albania, just because of pyramid schemes, because it was this new thing that came along, and there was no framework for people to deal with it, and they weren't really familiar with it, and it just messed everything up. And in some ways, I feel like that's what's happening here. We've arrived at a new situation, and we have really, like I said, no idea how it's going to work, because it's entirely new, this type of thing. And there's other things coming down the line as well that are going to happen that will upset things even more, like AI. AI is going to be a very big disrupting factor. I mean, I'm sure you've talked about this before, like the effects it's going to have on the workplace, for one thing, and the workforce, and the makeup of the workforce. When all the truck drivers are replaced by self-driving trucks, what are all the truck drivers going to do? Are they going to sit at home and surf the internet and watch Alex Jones? Quite possibly some of them will. So there are these factors that are largely unique in history, and I think we need to be very careful, and I think more attention needs to be paid to the actual point that we're at in history, and the fact that it might be a very, 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 very changeful time, a time that things will actually change in ways that are very unexpected. And I'm unclear. So I think we need to pay attention is the key point here.
Can I ask you something, Mick? Tapping into your previous career as a game designer, I was struck by a recent article by Reed Berkowitz that was on Medium. That was a game designer's analysis of QAnon, and it really broke down to how what you were talking about earlier, how the construct of the QAnon conspiracy is actually in of itself a game, and you are a player. And that there are rewards that you have, and you feel like you've hit levels and achievements the more that you follow these conspiracies. And so I'm wondering, and as we also saw with Social Dilemma in terms of the social engineering and persuasive design that goes into a lot of the apps and games that we use, is there something that we can consider in a proactive way, in an ethical way, to essentially help, I hate to say it this way, but to help program a society in a much more healthy way, knowing that if this is happening on one side and there's nothing on the other side to counter it, how do we do something about it?
It is a difficult thing, and your hesitation there in even bringing it up speaks volumes, I think. We're talking about, essentially not brainwashing, but that's how it comes across to people. We're trying to influence people, and we're trying to make people think better. But then, the obvious question is, like, who are you to tell me, what to think? And you're going to get pushback because of that. So you almost want to do it secretly, but then if you do it secretly, then they discover it. It becomes even worse. There was a thing, I think maybe like 15 years ago, an article by Cass Sunstein, where he was talking about conspiracy theories, mostly in the context of radicalization, jihadists. And he brought up the idea of what government should do is a program of cognitive infiltration, where you would actually go into the spaces where these people gathered, and you would introduce new ideas to them. And this was essentially, I think, a good idea, but it has become this talking point from the conspiracy theorists as to, you know, look how the government is trying to brainwash us. So I think we do need to bring this information and perspective to people, and to a degree, it's going to have to be a push thing. We've got to actually push the information out there. We can't just put it there and expect people to find it. But we have to be very careful in the way we do it, that it doesn't seem like that we're trying to brainwash people. So I think the key there, and this is something I talk about in my book, is to do it with absolute honesty and openness. You know, be very clear about what you're trying to do, what your motivations are. Open source it as much as possible. Make sure it's all out there. It's not just this secret thing. If you go into someone's space and try to cognitively infiltrate them, don't do it secretly. You can go into enemy space in a way and do it in a friendly way. I've gone to lots of online rooms and had discussions with people. You know, sometimes you get kicked out, but sometimes people will talk to you, like the 9/11 conspiracy theorists, chemtrail conspiracy theorists, the flat Earth conspiracy theorists, and even I go sometimes to more kind of, you know, right-wing pro-Trump conspiracy theorists. And if you talk to them well, you can actually cognitively infiltrate them, which is, like, you know, a very loaded term. But all it is you're just kind of sharing information. You're learning more about them, they're learning more about you, and everything improves because of that. So yeah, I think there are definitely things that we can do.
Hey, John, can I just ask one more real quick question? Sure. Mick, you know, about in 2006 or so, I wrote a paper for the Department of Defense on how to use social media to share positive, constructive information to help promote democracy in ways that we're seeing almost the exact opposite have today. And I remember the original charter was that, for example, it would allow them to connect with parts of the world where they were using dropping flyers out of airplanes into villages as a way to bring information to people who were disconnected. So knowing that this works in evil ways and nefarious ways, who then, Mick, is responsible for what you just shared in terms of advice? Who leads this? And when you have the leader of the free world promoting some of the biggest conspiracy theories out there, who does this?
That's a great question. It's a very difficult question. I remember when I was growing up, there was a notion in the UK of what we called the great and the good, which were the powerful people in society who were reliable for doing good work behind the scenes. You know, civil servants and the great rich people in the country. But, you know, that was like 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And now those people would probably be referred to as being the deep state, because there are these people who run the world secretly. But yeah, there are a lot of people who are in positions of power. I mean, there's big technology, you know, people like Zuckerberg and the heads of Google and whatnot. And then there's the various captains of industry, for want of a better word. And there's academia, and there is government. And I think we can't just have one body at the head of this. We need to have a collaboration between these various arms of society, for want of a better word, and they can work together. And that it isn't going to be simple. It's going to be a very, very complicated thing going forward. And there's going to be lots of complicated, I think, arrangements and organizations as we try things out to try to figure it out going forward. But I don't think we're going to just set up the Ministry of Truth and have the Ministry of Truth be telling everybody what to think, because obviously that's not going to work, because then the Ministry of Truth will either become a corrupt organization or will appear to be a corrupt organization. So we need to have essentially a continuous dialogue between the great and the good, whoever they may be nowadays, and try to steer it, I guess, into a direction where we have a better outcome. But I don't think there's an easy answer. I don't think the answer is going to be simple.
Yeah, you know, we're talking about wicked problems in a sense, where conflicting views of reality don't align and conflict is the result. And then, you know, wicked problem could be you know, something like, what do we do about climate change? But it could also be the factual, counterfactual, conspiracy theory stuff that we've been talking about. And the problem to me seems to be that we don't have a lot of skill at dealing with wicked problems, you know, complex problems. and there are not forums where the opposing views can come together in a constructive dialogue. So you have media bubbles. You know, you watch MSNBC, I watch Fox News, or, you know, worse. But you know, Chris Evans, the Captain America guy, has an app called Fulcrum, which is meant to bring, you know, all of the relevant information together for people to gather around it like a campfire. Don't know how well it's doing, but it seems like we have a real paucity of mechanisms and skills for reconciling views and bringing people into constructive dialogue. Now, maybe the internet can help, and maybe you have some other thoughts about how that can be accomplished.
Yeah, well, I think there are a lot of things out there that are great, like wonderful forums that people have where they have good discussions, and a lot is getting done. But the problem is getting it out to the audience. Like, a lot of these things are great, wonderful forums, but they only have a few hundred people watching them. So, you know, it's are they even useful? It's useful for a very small number of people, but it's the scaling problem here. And, you know, to some degree, the fragmentation problem. We have all these different organizations doing things. Like, you could say, for example, Vice News does some great investigations into things, but they only reach a certain number of people. And then you've got a whole bunch of people who think that Vice News is left-wing propaganda or whatever they think it is. I saw a lovely series of short documentaries. I think it was CBS did them, which were trying to present like fairly balanced views on things, which are, you know, very interesting. But again, you know, it's mainstream media, so it's how do you reach people with that? We do have this fragmentation, and we're going to have to live with it. We're not going to be able just to come up with an app that everybody's going to start using. It's just not going to work. You know, if anything, we need to focus more on the apps that we do have, like Twitter and Facebook. And in some ways, it's a shame that the result of cracking down on people has forced people away from it, because we're not going to get back that concentration of the audience that we had before. In some ways, Facebook and YouTube and Twitter replaced the big three networks in terms of their audience reach. Like, everybody looked at things on YouTube. Everybody was using Facebook. Everybody was using Twitter. Certainly a very large percentage of people. And that's something that for a brief moment, I think we had the eyes of everybody in this medium. We still have a lot of that. So I think maybe we shouldn't be trying to push things down so much and be quite so aggressive. Maybe in some ways, having a captured audience is a good thing. And maybe Twitter needs to, you know, and YouTube and Facebook needs to work with their audience rather than getting rid of their audience.
Oh, that is such a really good point, because you know, when you were talking earlier, I was thinking about, you know, maybe this information war becomes part of a UN charter or something official that's, you know, representative leading nations to come together and actually attack this together, because it is not going away. In fact, 74 million people in the United States believe that on January 6th, Trump is going to regain his presidency for a second term. That's a lot of people, and I got to imagine that number is only scaled over the years because of all of this access to misinformation and disinformation from the outside, and now also from the inside. Now learning that misinformation or disinformation or lies are more profitable. Now seeing institutions like Snopes kind of lose their credibility. And so I wonder then, how much further can we allow this to grow before we feel a sense of urgency as a united nation, as a series of united nations, to do something about this?
Oh, a very, very long way, I'm afraid, because this isn't the type of thing that politicians are focused on. Yeah, you say like there's the mythical me, like, well, how long can we let this go? But, you know, if it was up to you, you'd put a stop to it right now. But it's not up to you. It's up to the people who are in charge of these various countries throughout the world. And this country in particular right now has a big problem with the leadership. So nothing is getting done. And, you know, very likely that not a lot will get done. The United Nations does have lots of working groups on this. I actually spoke at a little mini conference that they had on countering violent extremism, and talked to them about conspiracy theories. But you know, again, it was a few hundred people were in attendance. I don't think we're going to get this huge push from the top anytime soon. I think it's got a very, very long way to go. And I think we really, unfortunately, are going to be left with trying to do it from a more grassroots, if that's an appropriate term to use, from the people who are actually involved on the ground, the people running the social media companies, and the people who are the content creators who share some responsibility for getting the content out there. I really don't think that we're going to see, any kind of push from the top anytime soon.
Hey, John, before I turn it over to you, I just want to ask one last question, because we are coming up on an hour. Mick, do you think, or how do you think, or how do you feel about accountability? So, for example, we have a leader who is the top, basically, in the United States, but the United States isn't alone. We saw this in Turkey. We've seen this all around the world, where conspiracy theories have led leaders to do really bad things. We have conversations about a coup actually maybe unfolding here in real time. Does accountability help, and should there be accountability for these type of actions, since we're actually seeing the consequences of these actions?
Well, I think accountability comes in two ways. There's either legal accountability, or there is just the response of society to your actions. And I don't really see there being a huge change in the law coming up anytime soon. If the laws have been broken, then yeah, sure, I think that there should be prosecutions, but this is kind of a difficult thing to prove, because we have freedom of speech, and it's highly arguable, if any individual thing had any particular effect. But I think people should certainly think about the holding their leaders accountable. I think the individual people should look very closely at what Donald Trump has done, and what the Republican Party has done in supporting Donald Trump, and even to some degree what all politicians across the political spectrum have done in essentially allowing this to happen, allowing things to get to where they are now. And they should try to push against that. But I don't think there's going to be some kind of change in the law. But yeah, I certainly think that people have been at fault, and they need to be held accountable, not to punish them. I'm not really a punishment type of person. It's more about how do we do it better in the future? If people have been, can we teach people a lesson by holding them accountable? Can we teach other people a lesson by holding other people accountable? Yeah, I think we should.
The sense of urgency, I think, may come from looking at this as a national security crisis. I mean, there was a monograph that was written about 30 years ago by some Chinese Air Force people called Unrestricted Warfare. And it was basically this kind of breathtaking reframing of warfare as something that you could do with any of the tools that society could put its hands on, which include the war of memes that we've been talking about. And I think that the sense of urgency could come from anywhere, but change usually doesn't happen unless there's a problem. And that may be one vector by which we get more kind of critical mass in terms of addressing some of these issues. So, Brian, we're all in terms of references here. Yeah, Mick.
I was just going to agree with you there, and I think that we need to point out that Russia is actually doing things here. Russia is actually attacking us. We're getting cyber attacks coming from Russia, and we're getting disinformation coming from Russia, and not just Russia, other countries too. And this needs to be exposed.
Right. Yeah. People have thus far focused on the cyber part and the fact that it affects our power grid or our ability to get online. But I think the war of memes is much more insidious and much harder to root out. And I don't think, just from my own experience with the national security community, I don't think people are really looking at this as a thing yet. But there is a narrative around turning it into a thing that I think would be quite important to bring to people's attention.
Well, and Mick, before you respond, I mean, it is a national security issue. It has been. We saw in Nashville. We don't have all of the facts yet, but we could go back to Pizzagate, and we could see that when disinformation wins, people believe it and they take action. They take up arms and they believe that it's in their realm of responsibility to do something about it, which is not unlike how we see ISIS, deploy terrorist attacks. It's basically the same thing that we're seeing here on U.S. soil, and it's bound to get worse. So if indeed it is a national security issue, and we have our own security leaders in the United States, for example, saying what's happening, Mick, for example, with Russia and China attacks and Iran, and then millions of people saying that that's fake news. It seems that the national security issue is beyond a threat at this point. I fear now that because it hasn't been toppled from the top, does this become the next administration's priority now that we're seeing the ramifications of that threat?
Yeah, I think, if a few million people think that something is fake news, that's not that important. Where it becomes important is where it kind of becomes a critical mass, and that kind of leaks into the government, and we start getting people in government who actually believe these conspiracy theories. And we know from the last few months of people talking about them that this is happening. People actually believe that Donald Trump won the election. And there are people in government who have even spread conspiracy theories about the Nashville attacks being some kind of cover-up for election fraud or something like that. So yeah, it's becoming a very real issue, and I think it's something that is being, to some extent, it's organic, but to some extent, it is being deliberately pushed by bad faith actors and foreign nation states.
Well, on that happy note.
Oh man, Mick, we were going to have you on for it's a normal span of 15, 20 minutes, but I think we could keep going. We took the whole show. I have so many more questions. I have so many more notes. Topic. Mick, would you be open to coming back in the new year?
Sure. Yeah.
And lastly, just to kind of take us out here in a minute or less, Mick, what do we have to worry about on January 6th? There's certainly we have QAnon supporters who are members of Congress now. We have people who believe that the election was stolen and are going to take action on the floor. So what do we have to look forward to?
I think we've got a lot of work ahead of us. I think on January the 6th, Biden's going to become the president, and it's going to be a wake-up call for a lot of people who thought that Trump was going to be the next president. And they still think that, and they're going to keep thinking that. A lot of these people think there's going to be a last-minute switcheroo on January the 6th, and that, I don't know, JFK Jr. is going to come in and install Trump as president. And it's not going to happen. So you're going to get a lot of disillusioned people. And so in some ways, it's an opportunity, and that we can kind of try to redirect them whilst they haven't immediately glommed onto the new thing. And it's going to be a challenge because there are going to be new things that come up after January the 6th, and it's going to evolve. So it's going to be a very interesting 2021.
Indeed. Well, Mick, absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. We look forward to having you back. John, any parting thoughts for Mick?
No, I just, observe that in China, when you say interesting, it's often the curse, as in may you live in interesting times. So we want it to be better than that for sure. But this is a great way to kind of segue into the realities of 2021. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, thank you, Mick. Happy New Year to you. Send my best to Holly, and we'll see you in the new year.
Will do. Okay, thank you, John and Ryan.
Wow, I was reading a bit the other day that said that once all of this constant chaos and this reality show that we're living in sort of subsides after January 20th, that there might be people waking up with a hangover, saying, wow, what was I thinking? What did I do? And I think, like you said, in terms of wishing interesting times upon people, let's wish positive, productive, and collaborative times ahead. Let's bring back creativity, one of the key pillars of innovation, as both you and I know. John, we'll have to have another show where we talk about what we learned this year and what we're looking forward to in terms of next year and some of our plans.
That's a good New Year's conversation as well. We'll resume our Thursday cadence next week, and then we'll be well into the new year at that point. So we can defer that conversation until then. I'll just observe that, the whole concept of intersections is really about bringing things together, and finding new edges and new points of contact and new hybrids and new blends and new mashups. And, you know, I think that's really what we need in this era of polarization, is a forum. And this is what Brian and I always kind of intended as one of the pillars of the show, a place where people can bring their ideas together and we can try to create something new, to imagine our way to the desired future. And in this case, to a great 2021.
Yeah.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Absolutely. Well said, John. Happy New Year, everyone. Please do take a moment to subscribe to our newsletter. We'll be kicking that off in the new year. We have a home for Intersections, so all of the past episodes and amazing guests that we've had on are all archived in the show format. We'll also be migrating these shows into a podcast once we can get a little bit more time on hand. So with that, I'm going to close this out, but John, Happy New Year to you, my friend. And to everyone, Happy New Year. And here's to a Happy New Year. Thank you, everyone.